it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Candy Crew stamp set. So I've stamped the images I'll be using on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn jet black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So the first combo that I'm using is E50, E51, and E53, and I'm going to be coloring my two bunnies with these shades. I wanted them to look really pale and creamy, so I'm using that E53 to lay in my shadows. For this first little guy, I'm going to put them on the right-hand side of his body since he's facing a little bit toward the left, also on the underside of his arms and between his legs. And then I blended that out with the E51. Then I came in with the E50 and started to soften up that color even more. And I'm going to let that fade into the plain white cardstock so that he has a really nice bright highlight on him, because I really don't want them to look like brown bunnies. I want them to look almost like white bunnies, but just have a creamy undertone. And then I'm going to move on to my second bunny, and he's facing completely forward, so my shadows are going to fall a little bit differently for him. They're going to be pretty much even on both the left and the right, but I will have a little extra shadow around that pumpkin basket that he is holding, because that would cast a shadow on the body, especially in this nighttime scene that I'm creating. So I am just going to blend all of that out and again leave a little bit of white space in the center of the face and the belly, kind of on the tips of the hands and the toes there, just for that extra highlight. And then I will also use these shades for the white parts of my fox, so the lower part of his face and the tip of his tail, and I also threw a little bit of that on the inside of his ear. And again, I'm going to leave some white space so that it doesn't look too brown. Next, I want to give them all some rosy cheeks, and I'm bringing in R00, R01, and R02. I'll also put that on the insides of their ears and color in the bunny's noses. So I'm starting with that R02, putting that at the base of the ears and also on that cheek area. And then I'll blend out that with the R01, and then I'll add in the R00, which is going to really help soften that into the rest of the coloring. It's a very pale shade. This is going to help everything blend, especially as it dries back. Then I'm going to move on to the rest of my fox, and I'm going with my go-to combo for foxes, which is YR12, YR14, and YR18. So I'm starting with my shadows once again with that YR18, and for this little guy, his face is forward, but his body is tilted a little bit toward the left. You can see the tail kind of swooshing out toward the right. So I'm going to do his face equally on both sides, but I will put a shadow up under his hat brim since that is nice and wide. And then for his body, I'm going to do his arms equally because those are still turned forward. But then the lower part of his body, I will put the shadows on the right-hand side and leave a nice highlight on the left. So once I have that YR18 laid in, I'm going to blend out with the YR14, carefully coloring around that little pumpkin basket, although I'm going to do his basket a little bit different, but we'll get to that later on. Making sure to blend over the YR18 with that YR14 to break up any harsh lines and get a nice smooth blend since we are coloring in fur. And then I'm going to fill in any remaining white space with that YR12. And again, I'm just catching the edge of that YR14 and pulling it into the lighter shade so everything is nicely blended. So now that my critters are colored in, I want to start working on their costumes, and I wanted to tie all three of them together. Even though they are each a different unique character, I wanted the color palette to be unified. So I decided to go with some neutral grays that I'm going to have consistently across each of their little costumes. And the shades that I chose were N3, N5, and N7, although I am going to add in a fourth shade in just a minute. I'm starting with that N7 and coloring in the little mask on this first little guy. Be really careful to place those darkest shades far away from his eyes so that you'll still be able to see them. And then I'm outlining the little bone structure of his bat wings, but I'm going to use a different color mixed in there as well. So I just want to keep that right to where the lines are drawn. And then I'm blending that out even further with the N3, and that's when I decided to bring in the N1 as well. So I'm going to pull that color across the bridge of his nose on the mask, and then just add a touch more of that into the little wings. And then we'll come back to him later on when we move on to our next color combo. So now I'm going to move over to the bunny on the far right. We're going to do the outer part of his cape. So I've switched back to my N7, and I'm adding that where the fabric is gathered at the base of the collar and then on the front edge of the part that kind of wraps around his body, because the outer part would be kind of swinging out and catching the light. And then I'm going to blend out that N7 with the N5. So as I am coloring these objects, I'm just thinking about surface area and what would be able to catch the light. And it's usually the parts of the fabric that are either flipped up or flipped out or just on top. So that's why I added my shadows down in the creases and then the highlights kind of where the fabric is bent toward the light. And I'm going to do the same thing with the fox's little witch hat, placing that N7 anywhere where the shadows would be. So I'm going to add them right up under the little band that's going across his hat, and also on the top edge, because that's kind of indenting the fabric of the hat a little bit, and then on the underside of the part that's bent over. And then I'll leave a nice highlight on the edge of the hat where it's kind of swooping down, and then also up on the top. And then I did throw a little N1 on the bunny's tail because you could see his. And then the next combo that I'm going to use is going to be kind of like a bright pinky red. I went with RV23, RV25, and RV29. So I'm starting with that RV29 for my darkest, and again just placing those darkest shades where I think the shadows would fall. So in this case it would be where that fabric is kind of swooping away from the viewer, and then the light would get in, you know, where we are facing it more directly. And then for the little witch hat, I'm going to put it in the crease again where the hat is kind of bent down and away. And then also on the underside closest to the head, because the outer edges are a little bit flipped up and would catch more light. Now this is going to be a nighttime scene, so there wouldn't technically be much light here. There should be a lot more shadows, but the coloring can look really heavy-handed if you don't add those highlights in, and so I just choose to make my night look a little bit brighter than it probably naturally would. So I also threw that color into the bat wings, but I only used the lightest two shades, so the RV23 and the RV25, just to kind of blend in with the grays that I'd already laid down. And then I wanted to color in a few of my little candies, so I'm going to use all three shades for that, and I'll do one of the little bar candies, and then one of the lollipops, and one of the little circular candies. Just adding the darkest color either on the bottom or in the center of the swirl, and then blending out from there. And then I'm going to move on to a different orange combo. I wanted to do the little pumpkin baskets, but I wanted it to be a different orange than I had already used on the fox. So I went with YR02, YR04, and YR07. Adding that YR07 into the little dark grooves for the little bunny in the cape, and then just on the right hand side, since that's the side that's tipped away from the light, for the bunny in the bat costume. And then I'll use the YR07 and the YR04 for the center section of the candy corn. Honestly, one shade would have been fine, but I decided to use two. I did only use one shade for the bottoms though, because it was thinner, and that was Y08. And then I'm going to add in Y02 and Y06 to that to do the other three little candies there. So just adding another little pop of that yellow to tie into the candy corns. And then I'm going to do E53 for the handles of my lollipops. That was the darkest for the bunnies. I just forgot to color those in when I had those out. And then for the fox's little basket, I decided to make it more of like a ghost rather than a pumpkin, just because I didn't want orange on orange. So I pulled out C0, C1, and C3. And then I grabbed a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and got that started off to the side. Mine's pretty old, so it gets dried up pretty quickly. I'm going to go over the eyes of my bunnies since they have their eyes open, which is going to make them stand out a little bit more, just get more bright and shiny. And then I'll trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm starting with a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock, and then I'm going to take the little moon die from the spooky scene from Hello Bluebird and die cut that out of some masking paper. Then I will use the rest of the die as a template to help me figure out where to place that moon down. And so I'll just peel off the backer sheet and then adhere that mask right where I wanted it, over toward the left-hand side near that tree branch that was sticking out. And then I'm going to take some Squeeze Lemonade Distress Oxide ink and blend right over that in a circle pattern, because I want to create a nice glow around that moon. Next, I'm going to bring in some picked raspberry, and I will take that right up to the squeezed lemonade and then just go over it a tiny little bit. Right now, I'm not worried about making these two shades blend together. I'm really just worried about blocking in the colors that I want to use, and then I'll go back and blend things in just a minute. The thing about Distress Oxide inks is that you really need to layer them up a few times to get those colors to blend nicely. So this is just my initial layer. Once I have that kind of blocked in, I'm going to go back to my squeeze lemonade and just add a bit more of that. And then I'm going to start kind of eating into that space and creating almost like an orangey shade. It's like a peachy orange that is going to be between the yellow and the pink. So I'm just going to work back and forth between those two ink blending tools, kind of creating a look that I want, and making that a bit more of a uniform circle shape around that moon. So I'll eat into a little bit more of that space and then just switch back to the yellow ink blending tool until I have like the shape that I want around that moon. Once I'm happy with how that's looking, I'm going to darken that up even further by adding in some black soot. And this one I want to be really cautious with, especially on that left top corner around that moon. I don't want it to get too dark over there. I can be a little bit more heavy-handed on the right side since the moon is more toward the left. But I just want to create a nice deep shadow on the edges of this panel. And I'm not worrying about placing that color down at the bottom because it's going to be covered up by the dyes that I'll be using. So I'm working back now between the black soot and the picked raspberry, and unfortunately I dipped my ink blending tool from the picked raspberry into the black soot, so I had to wipe off that ink blending tool. I did it first with a tissue, but that didn't work very well, so then I switched to a damp baby wipe, and that helped kind of pull some of that black soot back up. But the color did get a little bit dulled down compared to where I wanted it to go. So I did go back in with a bit more of that picked raspberry and then the squeezed lemonade Again, just working back and forth and adding in those layers and then deepening up the edges one more time, making sure that I have a level of saturation that I want for this particular scene. So then I wanted to add in some distressing and just create some more detail and interest. So I just put some plain water onto an acrylic block, and I'm going to tap that off the edge with a thin paintbrush. Let that react to those Distress Oxide inks, and then blot that up with a paper towel. And then I decided to add in a second layer of that just to have even more of that kind of soft glow of possible stars in the background. And then I'm going to do a little bit of black ink using that black soot. So I'll mix that in with the water. I don't want to get too carried away with this one, so I'm being very careful not to get too heavy-handed, but I like having a little bit of that black mixed in. I think it adds a lot of interest. And then I also wanted to have some white in there for stars. So I'm taking my Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White, and I'm going to add that to the other end of the block, and I'll mix some more water into that to make it a bit more fluid. And then I'll tap that on the background as well, just to create the look of those stars glowing around the moon. And then I'm going to set this panel aside to dry completely before I remove that mask. In the meantime, I'm going to take that spooky scene die from Hello Bluebird and trim that out of some black licorice cardstock from Lawn Fawn. And then once that background is completely dry, I'll use a craft pick to help me remove that moon mask. And then I can save that with the die set for another project. So I'm just going to put it right back on the backer sheet. And now we've got a nice bright white moon in the center of the scene. So I'm going to take the outer part of the spooky scene die, the little frame, and I'm going to add that to my card first. And that little corner stayed in there, so I just went ahead and left it there until I realized that that was actually supposed to be sky and not part of the tree. So I am going to remove that in just a minute. But I just placed the frame down first, and then I'm going to take that small little hillside and place that down at the bottom. I love how well these little die cuts fit together. It's just like putting together a puzzle. So I'm just pulling that down to make sure that it really butts up with the outside of the frame. And that's when I realized that that was actually sky. So I just peeled up that piece and blotted up the extra glue. And then I'll go ahead and adhere that tree. And I'm so grateful to have that Barely Art Precision Craft Glue with the super fine nozzle to get back behind all those little tiny branches of these trees. So everything can be really well adhered down. So now I'll take the other tree that goes on the other side and just fit that in and just press down on those little skinny branches to make sure that they are adhered down well. Then I'll pop this into my MISTI so that I can stamp my sentiment. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink because it's a nice, thick, dark black ink that lays well over Distress Oxide inks, which not every ink does. So I'm doing Sending You a Halloween Hello, and then I'm also doing a little eek over toward the left side that kind of crosses over the moon. So I stamped that down a few times to make sure it was nice and bold, and then I'll set that aside and pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using Lawn Fawn Guava cardstock, and I'm stamping on the inside in Storm Cloud ink. I just wanted something that was just a little bit lighter than black, just because I thought the black would look a little too stark against that brightly colored cardstock. So there is that after 2 stampings, and now I'm ready to adhere this to the card front. So just flip over that entire background and make sure that all the corners are lined up. This is an A2 standard size card, so 4 1/4 tall by 5 1/2 wide. And then I can bring in my images, and I'm going to lay out my critters and kind of figure out the placement, because I know that the fox's tail is going to go behind the little bunny that's dressed up as a bat, so I want to adhere him first, but I want to make sure that I have him placed correctly, so I'll use the other two guys as little placeholders to figure out where he should go. And then once I have him down, I can press him into place, and then I'll adhere the bunny bat over on the right hand side. I just love these little critters dressed up in their little spooky costumes, and there's even more critters. There's quite a few more, including the little bear that I used on the inside, and then I think there's 2 or 3 more critters in this stamp set, so there's a lot to choose from. So I'm adhering the bunny in the cape over on the left, and then I have a little spider that I wanted to be sitting on that branch right under the word eek. Almost as if he's afraid of the critters in their costumes rather than them being afraid of him, which I thought was a little bit comical. And then I just have all these little candies that I wanted to sprinkle on the ground. So I'm laying those out and kind of getting a feel for where I want them to go. So also making sure to lay them out in such a way that the colors don't repeat. So I'm always switching colors in between, so I don't have like 2 pinks or 2 yellows or 2 groups of candy corn right up next to each other. And these 2 little circular wrapped candies, I decided to layer one on top of each other just to have more room and more interest on the scene. And then there wasn't room for one of the little candies, the little lollipop. So I decided to put that into the bunny's hand since he has his one arm extended like that. I just thought maybe he could be carrying one from, the last house that they visited. So then I wanted to add a little bit of stardust stickles. So I have a bit of shimmer on the card. I'm going to place some on the outer edge of the moon and just be really careful to go around that sentiment so I don't get any liquid on that, so there's no chance of it smearing. I'm also going to add it to the pink parts of the costumes, so on the bat's wings and then the witch's hat, and then on the inner part of the cape, as if it's all from the same kind of fabric. Maybe one of their moms sewed their costumes this year. And then I decided to put it on the candies as well, and that's when I realized that I never glued down that first little lollipop. So I went ahead and adhered that down quickly, and then I'll go back and add some more stickles over top. And I did not add it to the candy corns just because they were so super tiny, so I skipped those and just did the wrapped candies. I did go back and decide to put it on the underside of the hat brim just so it's on all of the little pink parts of the costumes, and that is going to finish off this card. So I will lift that up so you can see the shimmer and all of the detail and give you another peek at the inside as well. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. I had so much fun creating this bright, happy little scene, so I hope that you enjoyed it too. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I love hearing from you guys. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, or ring that notification bell if you always want to be alerted when I post a new video. All of the products I use will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below, and if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you would also enjoy. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.